Hi, my name is Ellen Holste, and I am the Research and Community Engagement Manager at Pierce Cedar Creek Institute. Today, we're going to talk about Michigan's changing climate. What is it? How does it affect us? And what can we do about it? But before we do that, I first want you to think about how do you experience nature? What are things you do in nature? What are ways you get out into nature? Maybe it is taking photography, taking a walk, taking your dog for a walk, painting, journaling, planting in your garden. But in all those ways that you've experienced nature, what have you noticed in terms of the weather and the climate? Are your winters different than when you grew up? What about the summers? Well, just this past year in Michigan, we've experienced some changing weather. Thin ice conditions have canceled ice fishing contests. Snowmobile festivals have been canceled due to unseasonably warm weather. And Michigan skiing, dog sledding, all have been jeopardized due to lack of snow and climatic factors. And if you think about our weather over time, well, since the 1970s, we've gotten even more warm winter days, as well as less extreme cold, up to 10 degrees warmer in our winters. But what about our summers? Well, at least last summer, we had a huge heat wave. And even this last year, we had our hottest July on record in the 175 years that NOAA has been in existence. And what does that mean for other things? Well, in terms of planting in your garden, we have warmed an average of 5 degrees over the past 10 years, which means our plants that we plant no longer are in zone 5B, but basically they're in zone 6A, which means they can't withstand those cold temperatures that we used to have. We need plants that are in those warmer temperatures. And climate is what we expect, but weather is what we get. So, if you think of the differences between weather and climate, weather is those short term things that we experience on either minutes or hours. I know in Michigan, we like to say, wait 5 minutes and the weather will change. That's what weather is. But when we think of climate, that's that long term pattern. So, what we experience from year to year. So, when we think of it in terms of climate change is that long term shift in our global and local weather patterns that are mainly caused by carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. And these affect the weather that we experience from day to day. And what's actually causing that? Well, think of it this way: when the sun enters our atmosphere, there are lots of things that can affect it. Things such as heating our homes, such as driving our cars, producing things that we use every day, maybe in factories, even cows producing methane, or some of those forest fires. All of those things produce gases. And when they produce gas, they almost create like a blanket around the earth that's trapping in a lot of that sun's energy. And that trapped energy is what's causing the changes in our climate. And why should we care about a changing climate? Well, climate regulates life on the planet and determines how we live. Maybe we won't be skiing in the future. Maybe we will have to have more of our air conditioning on, or even have that fan on us all the time. It also can create more extreme weather events, such as droughts or even floods. Instead of getting rain a little bit at a time, we are starting to get more and more rain in these big rain events. So, climate change is making precipitation events even warmer, wetter, and even more intense. It's also causing more extreme health effects. So, we've experienced forest fires not just in California, but here in Michigan. And those effects from the Canadian wildfires, even wildfires here in Michigan, can cause a lot of respiratory problems. We also can experience more extreme economic impacts. So, those same forest fires that maybe California's experienced have made some homes uninsurable. And you may think that is California, but it can also affect what we are doing here in terms of affecting our home insurance. Climate change is actually making home insurance costs even more expensive. These are a lot of the major weather and climatic disasters just within this last year of 2024. And you notice a lot of them are getting closer and closer to Michigan, not just in California. And our climate is changing, and that change is going to continue to change. So, as you can kind of see on this graph here, this is the weather we've been experiencing. But as time goes on, as we are producing more of those greenhouse gases, our climate may become more like, for example, Indiana down to Kentucky. It may be more like current Alabama, Arkansas, or maybe even Oklahoma. So the future generations will basically experience a fundamentally different climate than what we are experiencing today. And you may think, well, what does it mean to have a climate like these different areas? Well, in terms of what we're used to here in Michigan, it may mean no maple sugaring. It may mean no ice fishing, no cross country skiing, no snowshoeing. It may mean no snowman building with that future generation, higher cooling bills, more tick and mosquito diseases, increases in venomous or invasive species, worse air quality or increases in heat stroke and exhaustion cases, or even increased droughts. So, if you've noticed some of these changes to our weather and to our climate, you're not alone. Nearly 3 out of 4 people said that climate change is happening and hurting people in the US today. And more than half of Michiganders are worried about global warming or climate change. And 7 in 10 Americans say that they felt sad about what is happening to the earth. And about 70% of Americans think that they have to make changes, whether major or minor, to their everyday lives because of climate change. All right, so this seems a little overwhelming. How do we do anything about this? Everybody talks about the weather. Nobody does anything about it. So, what can you actually do? Well, there was a recent article that said Americans love nature but don't feel empowered to protect it. And we've all heard about the many little or big things that you can do. But big journeys begin with small steps. To change our habits, we need to make tiny changes or small changes. So, we're going to talk about a few things that you can do in a few seconds, a few minutes, a few hours, weeks. Try one of these things. Try a little bit at a time. Maybe once you've tried that one thing, try something different. So let's talk about what you can do in a few seconds. Well, one of the things you can do is adopt climate friendly takeout practices. So when you go out to a restaurant, think about, well, what are they using in terms of their either takeout or take home materials? Are they using styrofoam? Are they using materials that aren't sustainable, aren't compostable? If they're not, maybe consider asking them if they would, or consider going to someplace else. Or consider maybe bringing your own items with you so you can take home that extra food. What about things you can do in a few minutes? Well, one thing you can do in a few minutes is pay your bills online or even via mobile. So, paper actually produces a lot of greenhouse gases as well. Even the effort to get that paper bill to you, that transportation cost, also contributes to climate change. If you're paying your bills online or via mobile, you're reducing that climatic effect. What about in a few hours? Well, we all probably have ordered something from Amazon or ordered something online. Think about maybe clicking on that slower shipping for shopping. If they have to make fewer trips and give you everything at one time, that's going to cut down on our climate change effects. And even better, try buying more local instead of ordering online. What about something you can do every day of the week? Well, one of the ones that I really like is taking personal care or thinking about your personal care products. Instead of maybe using a body wash that comes in a plastic bottle, consider using a bar of soap and putting that on your shower poof. You're reducing how much plastic you're using and you're cutting down on how much waste you have. Or maybe using instead of a cotton ball, use reusable cloth. What about things that you can do in a few months? Well, my favorite on this list is plant something. And if you're going to plant something that's going to take up some of those greenhouse gases, which plants do, plant something native. Native plants can withstand some of these climatic effects a lot more than some of those non native species that we love in our backyards and in our gardens. But natives are the ones that are going to survive to more our future. And lastly, what can you do right now? Well, you're doing it right now. You can educate yourself. And thank you for listening and educating yourself. You can speak up. Having those conversations really helps start that conversation with others and it normalizes the conversation around climate change. The more we talk about it, the more people will think about it and think about what they can do. Get involved. This is a fun one. It's not just sitting and learning, it's actually learning while you're doing things, whether it is working on a stewardship project or maybe learning through a community science or citizen science project. Also, talking with your wallet. When you actually pay for things, you're saying that I support this thing. And so, whatever you're paying for, think about how you're supporting something else. So, what's the Institute doing about this? Well, the Institute started a project called Climate Resilient Land Management, or CRLM. And in this project, we are testing, monitoring, and documenting our efforts in terms of what we're doing for climate change. We're evaluating and integrating resilient practices. And we're also not just doing them on our property, but we're also trying to educate others. So, providing educational opportunities for others to learn and implement similar techniques. But what is climate resiliency? Well, resiliency is the ability to prepare for, recover from, and adapt to climate change impacts. And when we think about climate change and land management, many programs only focus on what they call carbon sequestration or carbon storage. So, taking a lot of those gases or taking a lot of that carbon that's being produced and making a market. So, for those that produce more, they'll pay others to basically offset their carbon. However, carbon storage is just one part of a resilient ecosystem. There are many, many other parts to it. So we are promoting climate resilience many different ways. We're trying to maintain and enhance biodiversity in our ecosystems. We're promoting species that are more climate resilient, so that might be, for example, drought resistant or drought resilient. And we're also trying to encourage carbon sequestration or carbon storage in our soils. So to get some of that carbon, get some of those gases that we're producing and store them so they're not creating that blanket around the earth. And how can you support our efforts? Well, stay informed. Tell your friends. Have those conversations. Whether it's joining our email list to receive updates or checking out our YouTube or Facebook pages. Again, you can also get involved. Volunteer with our stewardship department or volunteer with our community science projects. Or you can also financially support this project. So, what will you do? I hope you learned a little bit today, and I hope you feel empowered to take that next small step. Thank you.